15th and 17th centuries, the Ottoman army was one of the best organized, paid and supplied in the world. The bulk of the army consisted of the provincial cavalry forces known as Timariot, Timarli Sipahi, after the military fiefs through which Istanbul compensated them for their service. In return for the right to collect revenues from his assigned fiefs, the Ottoman provincial cavalryman had to provide his own arms, armor and horse and report for military service along with his armed retainers, when called upon by the Sultan. The number of the armed retainers whom the provincial cavalryman had to keep, arm and bring with him on campaigns increased in proportion for the income from his fief. To keep track of the number of fire-holding cavalrymen and their obligations, the Ottomans used various types of land survey registers. During campaigns, master rolls were checked against these registers to determine if all the cavalrymen failed to report or bring the required retainers and equipment. If a cavalryman failed to report or bring the required number of retainers, he lost his military fief, which then was assigned to someone else. The Timar fief and related bureaucratic surveillance system provided the Ottoman sultans in the 15th and 16th centuries with a provincial cavalry 50,000 strong, while relieving the central bureaucracy of the burden of raising revenues and paying military salaries. When out on active duty, the Timarite provincial cavalry, led by the district and provincial governors, also proved instrumental for maintaining law and order in the provinces. These governors supervised and headed both the military and the provincial administration, and at least of the 16th century, were rotated every 2 years or so, and this and many other aspects they resembled. By the 16th century, the Ottoman Empire had emerged as a major military power in southeastern Europe and the Middle East. Ottoman methods of resource mobilization and warfare were taken into consideration during the military reforms. Russia and Ottoman. The importance of Janissaries and Streltsy in further strengthening the Sultan's and Tsar's position. All forts belong to the emperor, have his Janissaries who have own hierarchy, from where provisions are given from the emperor to the people. This gave him complete control, where a Janissar is a fortress for treasures, closed during struggle of brothers. The struggle of brothers can be described through direct quotation respectively. There is among the Turks the following custom. When two brothers are left after an emperor and carry on a struggle between them, the one who first takes refuge at the court of the Janissaries will gain the imperial throne. These parallel military developments also demonstrate the influence of Ottoman military fiscal models as stimuli for military developments in a vast region from Hungary to Muscovy, and thus question the proposition the war is culturally given. The 16th century Ottoman military was exposed to modern European armies and their tactics in the long war in Hungary against the Habsburgs, whose forces employed infantry musketeers on a scale comparable to the best armies of Western Europe. Istanbul also welcomed West European mercenaries. Their employment remained a curiosity, however, and did not affect the composition and tactics of the Ottoman military at all. The response to the challenges of Western European tactics remained within the traditional Ottoman military culture. It was also influenced by the availability of large numbers of freelance infantrymen, a consequence of the economic and social transformations that the Ottoman Empire witnessed in the second part of the 16th century, partly due to the population growth and monetization of the economy. To counterbalance Habsburg dominance in firepower, the Ottomans increased the number of the existing Janissary corps and enlisted other arms-bearing infantrymen from among the subject population. Neither method brought the desired result. To the contrary, the measure introduced by Istanbul weakened the government's ability to raise and provide for troops and left it dependent on local power brokers and notables in troop mobilization and war financing. The decline of Ottoman was because of cultural and technological conservatism of Islam, as well as military despotism that militated against the borrowing of Western techniques and against native inventiveness. In addition to provincial cavalry remunerated through the Timar land grants, the Ottoman sultans also established standing armies, beginning before their European and Asian rivals. The Janissaries established under Murad I and recruited through the Chils levy of the Shirmes system, numbered more than in the mid-15th century and reached about 10,000 men by the end of Mehmed Tun's reigns. They remained around 10,000–12,000 until the early 17th century. Infantry archers, or azabs, were also a significant force from the second half of the 14th century on. They constituted a kind of a peasant militia of originally unmarried lads who were fit for war and were levied from and equipped by the tax-paying subjects. Although their number was significant in those centuries, the elite Janissaries gradually took over their role in the army, regulating the naval and garrison duties. The bulk of the Ottoman army used swords and bows. By the 14th century, Ottoman government employed on a permanent basis gunners who manufactured and handled firearms, remunerating them through military fiefs. The Ottomans employed salaried gunners and topçular, beginning in the reign of Murad II. Janissaries were equipped with bows, crossbows, and javelins. In the 15th century, they began to use rifle, which were either arquebuses or small cannons. The fact that fortress inventories of the mid-15th century listed rifles alongside cannons suggests that by this time the rifles had evolved into handle-head firearms of the arquebus type. Murad III equipped the Janissaries with the more advanced matchlock musket. The Ottomans were known for their expertise in siege warfare, and Ottoman gunners reduced even the modernized European force in Hungary with astonishing effectiveness. Although the Ottoman Empire in the 15th century was stronger and has a more centralized, disciplined army, better logistics, and more stable financing. The Ottoman state witnessed Ayan becoming virtually independent forces with independent armies and support bases. Meanwhile, the traditional military forces were undergoing major transformations. The Ottomans also changed the composition of their armies in part as a response to improved Habsburg battlefield firearms and tactics. However, these changes, mostly the growth of the Janissary army and the recruitment of the seasonal Levant infantry armed with shoulder weapons, had many negative effects on the army, state finances, and society at large. Ottoman readjustment strategies led to military decentralization and the weakened Istanbul's control over its armed force and resources. After a while, not all the Janissaries stationed in Istanbul were mobilized for campaigns. Many were guards or pensioners. All the Janissaries unfit for active service were designed as guards and left behind to guard the Jaysiri barracks. Others joined the marching armies but did not fight. The pensioners were retired Janissaries with no military obligations. Furthermore, those Janissaries who actually did participate in campaigns performed poorly and this caused many problems. The increased demand for troops required widening the pool of recruitment to include Turks and other Muslim-borns. An increase in the number of Janissaries increased the burden, and later on, Janissaries had become craftsmen and shop owners just like Streltsy counterparts in the 17th century Muscovy. They married and settled in towns, established relationships with the civilian population, and were generally more interested in providing for their families than fighting the enemy. Similarly to the Streltsy, they jealously guarded the privileged and fiercely opposed all military reforms aimed at undermining their status.
By this time, the Janissaries had evolved into a powerful social caste and political pressure group. They all allied themselves with the religious establishment, ulema, and the guilds to guard their privilege and to limit the power of the Sultan and his government. By the end of the 17th century, only a small portion of the Cimmeria army could actually be mobilized. Their place was taken by the private forces of governors and local strongmen, known as Kapul Halku, or troops of the gate. Ottomans were able to alter the composition of their troops to match their Central European rivals, and cautioned against making the troops too cavalry-heavy. Istanbul had difficulties mobilizing the Timar holding Sipahis, which later on caused the collapse of the system. This curtailed the central government's role in the distribution of revenues. In Russia, the central government's revenues grew steadily during the 18th century. Compared to the Ottoman Empire, the revenues of the treasury increased. Russia. In the 17th and 18th centuries, the Russian army's armed forces grew steadily, and their composition, tactics, and weaponry demonstrated slow adaptation and adoption of Western methods of warfare. In the 18th century, the army grew further. Russia maintained Europe's largest standing army on revenues, which was 1/5 of those of France, and relied upon the conscription of serfs and nobles. In addition to army growth, the changes in the composition of the Russian armed forces were even more important. The wars against the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth and Sweden exposed the weaknesses of the traditional military system based on Pomm's cavalry. The challenges that the Ottoman and others, for example the Muscovite political and military elites, faced during their respective terms of trouble, and in the war against their western and northern enemies, produced strikingly different responses. These led in turn to dissimilar outcomes. a decentralized Ottoman Empire with limited sultanic authority, and a more autocratic Russia, whose government had far greater control over resources and means of organized violence than its Ottoman counterpart. The Ottomans restructured the military in the 17th and 18th centuries, partly in response to tactical challenges they faced on their Hungarian frontier against the Habsburg field armies. As observed, neither the increase in the number of janissaries nor the hiring of peasant militias proved successful in the long run. After 1606, the classical military became unsuccessful in the wars. In order to improve the military power, in 1796, Ottoman Empire demanded for qualified soldiers in terms of gunpowder and bombs from France. Besides, after a while, French General Menanad sent a group of experts in order to check the military of Ottomans. This checking process lasted about 2 years and then ended with Vakai Hayriye, blessed event which is destroying the old army and forming a new one, Asakiri Mansure Muhammadiye. Despite all these treaties and efforts at modernization, the Janissaries and their allies managed to derail Sultan Selim III's Western-style, militarily, bureaucratic, and financial reforms, even killing the infidel Sultan himself. It was not until the 1830s that the fundamental reforms could be started under Mahmud II, who destroyed the Janissaries in 1826.